only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. You joined us in the middle of a three-part series, so if you missed yesterday, get on the website right now, wallbuilderslive.com. You can download yesterday's program and then catch up with today. But don't worry, even if you missed yesterday and you can't go get it downloaded, you're still going to enjoy the things we talk about today. The series is called Godonomics. It's a book by Chad Hovind. You can check out the book and the DVD set and the workbook at godonomics.com. Chad, great to have you back today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, enjoyed yesterday. Learned a lot about the concept of profit, the downsides to socialism, the downsides to having government cut the checks for us to help people because we don't know whether or not they're actually in need. And, in fact, as we start off today, remind us of that scripture that has the difference between a burden and actually carrying your own load.
Yeah, Galatians chapter 6 says everyone must carry their own load, but we carry each other's burdens, and how important that is. You know, I remember telling a story years ago. A woman came to me in middle age, and she said, "Hey, my mom's passing away," and one of the last things she said was, make sure you take care of your brother. And she was asking me advice, and her brother was in his 50s, and he was a compulsive gambler, and her whole life she had financially supported him in making these bad decisions. And so this woman was asking me, "What's your advice?" And I said, "Well, at what point does he grow up? At what point does he need to start carrying his own load?" And what you've happened is your mom, in trying to do the right thing, has financially crippled him his whole life because he never learned that being bailed out is not helpful. So when you actually rescue somebody from their load, you don't help them. And I have worked with addicts at a methadone clinic and worked with folks coming out of recovery. I have a great compassion for how challenging it is to come out of addictions. But this paradigm is so helpful when you say, okay, is this a load or a burden? Is this a crushing weight that I need to help them with so they can move on? Or is this their load, their responsibility? In which case I can sort of break generational poverty by encouraging them to learn about it, but ultimately don't carry somebody else's load. Or what will happen is you will suddenly have a job for the rest of your life.
Oh, man, no doubt. You'll be taking care of it from then on. So how do we then, before we jump further into the economics thing, what about public policy? What do you recommend as you study these things, the changes that we should make in our public policy that would be a more of a biblical worldview on this issue of carrying the load versus the burden?
Well, there's probably so many, it's hard to know where to start, but I think I would start with maybe a constitutional amendment that said that all rules and all laws apply to all people equally. The amazing things you see about God as he brought the people out of Israel is he said, I want to teach you about property rights and Ten Commandments. I want to teach you about incentive. But I also want to teach you that no longer is it going to be the survival of the wickedest, the most wicked. It's no longer going to be survival of the strongest. We're going to operate by the rule of law. There's going to be standards that all people have to adhere to equally. He says even the foreigner and the native. And this was pretty amazing that everyone would be under the rule of law. Even once kings got put in place, which was not God's ideal, he'd warned against kings, but even the kings in the Bible were actually operating like a republic. If you remember in Deuteronomy, God says, I want the king every day to read the law and remind himself he's under the law. Now that's a republic where no matter where you are in society, everyone has to operate according to the same standards. What we have today is, well, we're going to pass this great law, it's this great health care plan. We're not going to be in it, the people who passed it, but you have to be in it. Well, what happens then is somebody comes along and says, hey, I donated to your campaign, right? Yeah, okay, well, can I have an exception too? Can I have an exception?
Yeah.
What happens is you create this inefficiency and this bureaucracy because people who don't like the law aren't incentivized to change it. They just get out of it. But when all people have to apply equally to the laws, if you have a bad law, you can assess it and change it. I mean, that's what I think Martin Luther King was saying in his great letter from the Alabama jail. He was quoting Augustine when he said, just laws in our society have to mirror the just laws of God. And when you have a just system, that means everybody is under the same law. Every time you see, governments, every time you see, pharaohs, every time you see dictators through history, they always begin to have different standards for themselves. It's like Animal Farm, all are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Some are more equal than others.
The pigs start making themselves the exception to the rule, and I always joke it's like Boss Hogg. He's the ultimate political porker because he had different laws for himself than he had for the Duke boys. And what happens is you happen to be a rich guy coming through Hazard County. What he does is, if you don't give us a free concert tomorrow, we're going to throw you in jail. Well, what kind of rule is that? Well, it doesn't matter. We're in charge. And that's what happens when you move away from public policy, from laws that apply to all people equally. It's also one of the problems with the progressive tax system, is all of a sudden progressive tax system isn't based on a fair tax or a flat tax that applies to all people equally. Suddenly it's, you can be incentivized to tax this person or find that loophole rather than finding a common standard that we all agree to and is based on a sense of fairness that we all sort of feel in our gut.
Yeah, very good. Good stuff. Got to take a quick break. Chad Hovind, our guest. When we come back, we're going to jump back on the 6 stages of Godonomics. Yesterday we talked about producing and profiting. Chad, I want to talk to you a little bit about what you lay out in terms of saving and why it's good for people to have a profit, be able to put that money back, and what are the good things that you can do with that money and that God would bless you with. Back in a moment, Chad Hovind, our guest, right here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Although education has remained an emphasis in America for nearly 200 years, what has changed the most over that period of time is the philosophy of education. For example, while religion finds no place of refuge in our schools today, such was not the case at the time of our founding fathers. In fact, when the Delaware Indian chiefs brought their youth to be trained in America's schools, on June the 12th, 1779, George Washington told them, "You do well to wish to learn our arts and our way of life, and above all, the religion of Jesus Christ. These will make you a greater and happier people than you are. Congress will do everything they can to assist you in this wise intention." According to George Washington, what students learned above all in American education at the time of the Founding Fathers was the religion of Jesus Christ.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Chad Hovind, our guest. The website, Godonomics.com. Check it out there for more information on the materials, DVDs, books, actual great workbooks with visuals. Chad, I'm a visual guy. I got to see the pictures. It's not enough for me just to read, which is why I love the way you laid out the 6 stages of Godonomics. It just made sense when I was watching the video, and you put it up there on the big board, and you showed, when you produce and you go out and work hard, you profit, and then you're able to save, and then you showed 3 areas that are godly ways to spend that money that you've saved.
Yes, certainly it's giving, it's investing, and it's spending. And, what's so powerful is that money, which often causes stress. As a pastor, I get to sit with folks who have hidden bank accounts, and they're trying to figure out how to tell their spouse, or they got themselves in incredible debt, and it's affecting the things they love the most, like their family and marriage. Money should be fun, and it should be fuel. And that's God's desire. When He becomes the center of your life, you have this ambitious contentment where you say, hey, I can be content in any situation, but I'm also ambitious to say, I want to use the talents and opportunities God's given me. And the reason money should be fun is because we're using your money to bless people. You're using it to bless your kids, to create experiences where you can have fun together. My dad was a public school teacher. He made, zero to no money, and yet he showed how such incredible creativity could be used. We had 3-wheelers. We always bought them used and fixed them ourselves. We'd have a swimming pool in our backyard. We spent $100 on it and, literally riveted it back together in the backyard ourselves. And money became fun, and we didn't have a lot of money. But we found ways to take the money we had without overspending and have incredible fun with it. But also it's fuel. It's fuel for a lot of things. It's a fuel for taking care of yourself. We should be able to take care of ourselves. That's what prophets do. We should be able to take care of those in our family. I mentioned last week or yesterday the passage in 1 Timothy that says if you can't take care of your own family, you're worse than an unbeliever. Proverbs says that you should leave an inheritance to your children's children. Part of profiting is making enough money in savings that you can not only bless yourself, but bless generations with that kind of profiting you've been doing. That is so exciting and such a contrast to our government. $17 trillion in debt, a trillion, overspending $1 trillion a year, and we're 120 or whatever it is in unfunded liabilities. And we're not leaving our grandkids reserves. We're leaving them receipts. I used to listen to a lot of Dickie and Tommy Smothers growing up, And instead of saying it's better to give than receive, I think Tommy used to say it's better to have gifts than receipts. And I think that's where we are as a country, is we have all these gifts and we just pass the receipts on to the next generation. And it's totally immoral, and it's totally backward to the idea of having savings. And as public policy, we begin to talk about, can we cut? We can't even define a cut. What we mean is we're going to cut the amount of addition to spending we were going to do. We don't even have the conversation about, no, stop spending any more than you make. Let's pay off the debt, and let's try and have reserves and savings as a nation. I mean, the whole concept of that isn't even on the radar of conversation. So whenever people are talking about cuts, you can sort of realize you're in bizarro world, because they're not even talking about a cut the way normal people would define it in a weekly budget.
And you explain in the Godonomics program how we got to that point with the John Maynard Keynes philosophy of we're going to spend our way out of this, we're going to borrow our way, and the difference between producing and consuming. Give us an explanation of that.
Well, there's lots of examples. One sort of example from history would be George Washington. I joke about how George Washington was bled to death by his doctors, and that's the truth. Because what happened is, at the time, they believed in bloodletting. So they thought when George Washington got sick that he had bad blood, so they pumped another pint out of him, hoping his heart would produce new blood. And ultimately, his doctors killed him because they kept pumping out blood thinking they were helping him. In the same way, what John Keynes' idea was that when demand goes down during economic recession, you need to boost aggregate demand with the government, which basically means the government needs to spend money it doesn't have, pump blood out of the economy, inflate the currency, or borrow from other nations. Well, what happens is you end up bleeding the economy out. You create this artificial sugar high, and then it comes crashing down. The Bible speaks against all three of those. If it's borrowing from other nations, Deuteronomy tells us, do not borrow from other nations, or they become the head and you become the tail. You lose your sovereignty. If it's about just currency, we've been printing like mad for the last 10 years now. And the Bible talks about just weights. And when you print money, you devalue that money, and who it hurts the most is the poor, because they have the least amount of money. Or you tax the producer. And what happens when you tax the producer? Well, guess what? They're not providing as many jobs. So the more you practice Keynesianism, the more you destroy the economy, while the whole time you're telling yourself you're trying to help it. It's just like those doctors with George Washington. I mean, I feel like I'm watching Weekend at Bernie's to sort of lift up Bernie's hand and say, look, he's doing fine. He's actually dead. That's almost what we're doing with the economy. We're reaching up and waving Uncle Sam's hand saying he's doing great, but we've bled him to death. Yeah, and that's what's been happening.
And it's kind of scary when you think about it. How long can you prop it up? And the longer you prop it up, does that make the crash even harder at the end when you try to get the course corrections in the economy? Got to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the idea of acting your own wage. I love the way you do that in the class as well. Stay with us, folks. Chad Hovind, our guest. We're talking Godonomics here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The teachings of God's Word are the best friend civil government has, because these teachings deal with the heart. Only by dealing with the heart can crime be prevented, for as Jesus explained in Matthew 5, all crime comes from the heart. Understanding this, Daniel Webster, the great defender of the Constitution, once declared, "The cultivation of the religious sentiment represses licentiousness. It inspires respect for law and order and gives strength to the whole social fabric. Whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. Indeed, it is not the good Christians whom the police arrest for armed robbery, gang activity, or other such crimes." Understanding this, the Founding Fathers encouraged religious instruction, for as Daniel Webster so accurately noted, good Christians make good citizens.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Go to wallbuilderslive.com and you can get yesterday's program. If you're just tuning in with us, we're in the middle of a three-part series on Godonomics. Chad Hovind, our guest. The website is Godonomics.com. As we were going to break, Chad, we were talking about Keynesian economics and this idea of borrowing your way and trying to spend your way out of a recession. And I forgot to ask you, even just when you think about the source of some of these concepts, I mean, Keynes really wanted us to become more and more socialistic. I mean, why would we want to take the advice and implement policies of a guy that wants socialism instead of going back to the capitalist ideas?
Yeah, I mean, he basically told us what he wanted to do is he wanted to debauch the currency, he wanted to regain power for himself, and it's a great system for doing that. One of his famous quotes is, if you owe your banker £1,000, you're at his mercy, and if you owe him £1 million, he's at your mercy. And what he's basically saying is, if you go to your bank, of course he's using pounds and British, but if you owe the bank $1,000, you're at their mercy. So borrow more until you've borrowed so much that they're at your mercy. Oh, you owe me $1 million, I got to work with you. So his premise, rather than the Bible, which says, "Oh, no one anything," and that a borrower is enslaved to the lender, Keynes' idea was borrow more because you can overspend your way to prosperity. But you never overspend your way to prosperity. You always overspend your way to slavery.
Yeah, it's an absolute facade, and I like the way you say it in the workbook. Godonomics is based upon producing. Keynesian economics is based upon consuming.
Yep.
And just from a biblical point of view, we're supposed to produce. We're supposed to work, and like you said, not spend more than we're making. You said that earlier in terms of talking about the government. How about us as individuals acting our own wage?
Yeah, Godonomics addresses macroeconomics, which a lot of places don't, but then it very much addresses the personal stuff too. How do you act your own wage? I recommend 3 steps. Look inward, look backward, and look forward. But it begins with look inward. I mean, Jesus said your heart is where your treasure is. And many of us don't look inward and feel like why do I keep making these decisions? Most people don't. It's not shocking to find out that you shouldn't spend more than you make. That's not a shocking statement. But why do we keep doing it? And I don't know if you're a Monty Python fan or not, but one of my favorite Monty Python things is Spam-a-lot. Spam-a-lot. And spam always reminds me of what's really going on inside people. Is the real God that's sort of functioning, controlling their life is spam, status, performance, appearance, and money. And as long as that's ruling your life, if you say, boy, I really feel good about myself based on how I look or how I perform or my status, you're going to find yourself, buying cars you can't afford, buying houses you can't afford, or clothes you can't afford, because what's really driving you under the surface is actually these, what the Bible calls idols, the spams. And until you allow God to be the center of your life and look inward and say, God, I want to give you control of my heart, I find my identity in you and your grace alone and what Christ did for me. That's where the freedom comes in your heart to be able to go, oh, man, I've now got my identity set right so that I can make these better decisions.
And say those 4 again real quick. I want to write those. So it's status, performance,
appearance, and money.
Appearance and money. Oh, man.
Sometimes I'll say it, it's the wabbit behind your habit. Elmer Fudd was so right. You need to go wabbit hunting. And many of us say, why can't I change my habits? Well, the reason you can't change your habits, financially or otherwise, is because you've never dealt with your wabbit. And the wabbit is that inner God under the surface that's really controlling what you do. And what God does is he comes in and says, you should have no other gods before me. And that means if you're allowing your, clothes, your house, your looks, your performance, your appearance to drive who you are, you're never going to be free because ultimately that wabbit is driving you. So that's the first step, is to look inward.
And that status, I mean, we got to keep up with the brother-in-law or the cousin or the neighbor or whoever, keeping up with the Joneses, as we used to say. I mean, just trying to put our identity in those things. When you get comfortable with your identity in Christ and realize that those things are secondary, wow, you can make that decision to, drive that car for another 5 years and not spend money on a new one. And you don't have to upgrade to the super big house and a mortgage that you really can't afford. It puts everything back in line.
Yeah, if you look at the book, I give lots of examples of how I teach these principles to my kids. My son wanted to buy an Xbox. I told him he had to buy it on his own money. Suddenly he was incentivized to work. All of a sudden he wanted to know how to use eBay and how to use Craigslist and how to get a good deal. And, we got a great deal for him. My daughter said she wanted to buy her first car. She just turned 16. She said she wanted a red convertible. I said, honey, we all want a red convertible. Good luck.
Yeah.
But I said, if you raise the money, and she had about a $2,500 budget, I said, I will work with you and we will find the best deal we can. And sure enough, creativity always works in the context of limiting yourself to, be content. So sure enough, we found a car for $2,500. It was a 2000 red Saab. My marriage is in trouble because my wife said that our daughter got a convertible before we did. But the point was, there are ways to be creative and find things you want while at the same time saying, I'm not going to go into debt. You suddenly get very, very creative. And again, I've got lots of stories in the book about how to teach these, how my grandpa taught them to my dad, how my dad taught these things to me.
Yeah, and in fact, I wanted to mention to our listeners, I mean, we're just hitting the highlights here and kind of segment to segment, jumping into different topics just to give folks an idea and really encourage you to dig a lot deeper, folks. And that's why I encourage you, for more information, go to Godonomics.com, and you can find out about the materials that'll dive a lot further into this. We've got to take one more break. When we come back, Chad, let's talk about those other two items. You said to act your own wage, you got to look inward, and we'll talk about the other two when we come back. Stay with us, folks, here on WallBuilders Live.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Chad Hovind with us. We're talking Godonomics. For more information, go to the website, Godonomics.com, where you will find a lot of great information. And Chad, as we went to the break, we were talking about how individually we can act our own wage. And you said the first step in that is looking inward, finding out what it is that's causing us to want all these things and have our identity in the wrong place rather than Christ. Once we get that in check, what's the next step?
Yeah, it's to look backwards. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this as a book and as a DVD series is because I want to get into real details on how do you do this. You know, part of looking backwards is a great proverb that says, as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. Why do we find ourselves doing the same thing over and over again? Many times we need to pause and look backwards and say, what are the patterns in my life? See, the wise man sees danger and hides himself, but the fool keeps going and suffers for it. Many times we need to look backwards and say, what are the patterns of my spending? You know, for me, it was getting a Quicken type program and start looking at. They're online all the time now. Like, how much money is going toward going out to eat? Yeah, every time I check it, I'm like shocked. You know, who are these people who are spending so much money on food and movies? Oh, it's me. And all of a sudden, I go, oh wow. You know what? I don't think I spent that much. But looking backwards begins to help you go, oh, this is where the money's going. Is that how I want to prioritize? Was it worth going out to eat, twice this week or 3 times this week or whatever it was? But if you don't look backward, you're not going to see those patterns. And, I love this old Saturday Night Live sketch that Steve Martin is in, and it's about a new book that comes out for handling your money. And the book title is Don't Buy Stuff You Can't Afford. And the whole book is 1 page long. It just says, don't buy stuff you can't afford. And Steve Martin's like, this is confusing. What do you mean? Don't buy stuff you can't afford. And part of looking backward is seeing those patterns. And once you look backwards, you can look forward and say, okay, now, based on what I've been doing, what do I want to do moving forward? See, the plans of the diligent, move you forward. You begin to say, I need to set a budget. But many people think of a budget as something restrictive. A budget is a vision. It says, where am I going to spend my money? And everyone has a budget. Look at your checkbook. That's your budget. You can like your budget or not like your budget, but a budget is just how you spend your money. A budget, though, when you begin to be intentional, you said, I'm going to write this down, this vision, so I can run with it, like it says in Habakkuk. You start saying, does my budget match what I want it to be? Does it match God's priorities? And then you start saying, hey, if I want to do a vacation this year, maybe I should go out to eat less so that we can go on a nice vacation. Maybe I want to give more. I mean, every year my wife and I use the 3 Ps, and we want to give to God's priorities, we want to become progressively more generous, and we want to give additional percentages of our income if we can. That's a great way of saying, if I want to do that, if I want to be more in line with God's priorities, what decisions do I need to make each week or each day to align myself to it?
There's so much there, man. Again, I encourage people to dig deeper. There's so many great examples of how to apply this in our lives. And Chad, I don't think we can fix the national economic crisis that we are in if we don't first fix it at home. Do you agree with that we start personally and then branch out from there?
Yeah, we always end up electing people that mirror us often, as a culture, and so we need to start by getting our own hearts and houses in order. It doesn't surprise me that a nation of people who overspend elect people who overspend, right? So let's judgment starts with the house of God. Let's look at ourselves in the mirror, get our own hearts content, and then we can elect people who can do the right thing, even under the temptations of overspending.
I only got about 30 seconds left, but tell me, what do you think is the church doing any better? It seems like Dave Ramsey's had a big impact. There are others out there that are teaching this. It seems like we're paying more attention to it than we did in the past. Are you seeing progress as you visit with other pastors and speak in other churches? I mean, obviously in your own church you're teaching it, but do you see it nationwide as well?
Well, I think we are making progress, but I still think you look at the Jim Wallaces and the Al Sharptons, I still think there is a predominant bend towards socialism. Jesus was a socialist or a Marxist that we need to come against. And I think it comes back to the idea that most people have never really studied this. Pastors aren't trained in this. Most pastors don't go into ministry to make money, so they almost come with a bent against it. So one of the reasons I provide this tool is I want a tool that was inherently biblical that could teach people why this really is true at both a macro and a personal level.
Governor Mike Huckabee says of it, a truly brilliant breakdown of what the Bible says about the economy. The book is called Godonomics, How to Save Our Country and Protect Your Wallet Through Biblical Principles of Finance. The website, Godonomics.com. We've got one more program on this. It's going to be tomorrow. If you missed yesterday, it's online right now at WallBuildersLive.com. I would encourage you after tomorrow to take all 3 programs, send them out to your friends and family, get them educated on this, and for more information, visit Godonomics.com. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting.